Good evening and welcome to the September 26th Civil Service Commission meeting. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Manukian.
Here.
Commissioner Gazarian.
Here.
Commissioner Gregorian.
Here.
Commissioner Gantis.
Here.
Chair Devine.
Here. May we have the next item, please?
Minutes.
Okay. Has anybody reviewed the minutes from the...
We wait for you to do that.
Okay, I did, and I do have some comments. I'll go ahead and make my comments, and then we'll let the commissioners. Under item number 15, 15A, where you state that the similar qualifications transfer was approved by unanimous vote, it said Chair Devine gave a recommendation to amend the civil service rules. A couple of things. First of all, that recommendation, or actually those comments came under the Civil Service Commission staff comments. That was not made, so I'd like to get that moved under item number 14. And in reality, I did not make a recommendation, although that was my intent. What I asked for, or what I wanted to do, is have a report written which gave the pros and cons of changing the civil service rules. So if we get those little things squared away, I would appreciate it.
What are we looking at?
On page 2 of the minutes,
Of which?
last meeting.
Okay, I don't see what you're talking about. Oh, I see. Sorry.
And also under item B, there's a typo where it said the appellant chose to have an opening. There's an N added at the end of have. Okay, under item number 10, where it says Chair Devine opened the public meeting, actually it's a public hearing, so to keep the wording in line, I'd like to change that. And in that same paragraph at the end where it said he closed the meeting and he closed the public hearing. And finally, under that item, I think we took a motion and a second and a vote on that, and I didn't see that listed under that action. So, Mr. Doyle, would that be an appropriate thing to add in there, the motion, second, and vote?
Chair Devine, yes. There certainly was an action, and we regret the leaving that out. So that was an action taken on that resolution. So.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. That's all I had. Do any of the other commissioners have comments on the minutes? Seeing none, unfortunately, we need to take the vote on this in parts because Commissioner Manukian was not here for items 1 through 8, and Commissioner Gregorian was absent or left for items 15 and B and C and 10 through 15. So can I get a motion from either Mr. Gantis or...
I so move.
Okay, for the total package, and we're going to take a vote, and I'm going to assume that Mr. Manukian will abstain on items 1 through 8.
Mr. Manukian is abstaining all day today.
Pardon me?
Yes, I am
Okay,
abstaining.
and Mr. Gregorian will abstain on items 15B, C, and 10 through 15.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and with that, we have a unanimous vote on the remaining items. Okay, next item, please.
Oral communications.
I have no cards. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Recruitment and examination report.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is the recruitment and examination report. This is a note and file item. It merely reflects the recruitment activity that we're currently addressing. This report shows the various staff members, their assignments with regard to the recruitments that are at various stages. As you can see, it's a relatively moderate recruitment load at this time. We have a variety of different positions up, many of which as this is relatively early in the fiscal year. Many of these are promotional type recruitments as we try to effectuate some of the reorganizations that we've been talking about. And as you can see, we have the police officer recruit positions open, both the bilingual and the regular police officer recruit positions that are currently going. If you have questions on this report, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions? Okay, as a note and final item, we'll go to the next item, please.
Eligible lists established.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a somewhat unusual version of this report. This is typically the report that we offer each meeting, reflecting the recruitment activity and the list that end up getting established as a result of a traditional recruitment process, where there's an application filing period, exams, and ultimately the eligible list gets established. This meeting's report is almost exclusively addressing the lists that have been established following our layoff at the end of August. And so you see, I would say, all but one of these lists that have been established are in fact layoff lists, reflective of the activity that had occurred last month. These are again, the people on these lists are those who have been laid off from their existing positions. Some were laid off completely from employment. Others were bumped from these positions to something lower than that. But nevertheless, anyone who's displaced through a traditional layoff ends up on a layoff eligibility list, and they are subject to rehire when we go back or if we have the opportunity to fill these positions in any capacity. So what you see is a whole long list of essentially layoff lists, and then at the very end there's one traditional list that's been established, that Deputy Director in the Public Works Department. But again, this is probably one of the few times that you'll see this type of list. So if you have questions on that or needs further understanding of that process, again, I'd be happy to try and answer that for you.
Any questions? I do have one question on the Deputy Director of Public Works. I read it correctly, 3 applications were received, but only one candidate made the eligible list. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that was based on, those were screened based on qualifications.
And that was a screening just off the application?
Yes.
No exam was given?
No exam.
Okay. Seeing no questions, we'll move on to the next item.
Human Resources Activity Report.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is the Human Resources Civil Service Activity Report for the fiscal year 2011-2012. It's a little bittersweet to present this report without its main author here, but I think you all recall Debbie Mallon, who was the very good staff member within the Human Resources Department, has retired. In fact, she was one of many people who took us up on a retirement this past month, and she was more or less responsible for the compiling of this report on an annual basis. This report does show many of the various activities, not only that the Civil Service Commission deals with, but also the human resources staff in general. We try to provide numbers and information on the recruitment activity, our exams, performance evaluations, disciplinary actions, turnover, training and development, and all the various things that are done in this department. And it's just a rather interesting hodgepodge of information. We always present the data again at the end of one fiscal year, and we compare it to the previous fiscal year. So in the report you'll see 2 columns, and you can more or less compare and contrast what's occurred from one year to the next. When we're looking at this report, we try to identify any particular trends in either employment or labor relations activity or disciplinary cases, and I have to say there's not any significant trends. A lot of things are very similar from one year to the next. A couple of things that we addressed in the summary about our applicant number of applicants and the number of exams administered was down a slight bit from the previous year. However, the number of individuals hired increased slightly. That pretty much accounts for hiring almost done exclusively in the police department. We brought on a total of 19 new salaried police officer recruits over this past fiscal year out of the total 53 employees hired on overall throughout the city. And those 19 police officer recruits are really, not that the police department's getting bigger, but in the preceding year, we had a large number of retirements within the police department. I think it was over 20, even close to 25 in 1 year. So we're trying to catch up with that. So we've continued to recruit for police officer recruits, and that's more or less what shows the increase in our hiring. Another trend we like to look at is turnover at the city, and turnover has remained relatively low. It's always been in the 5 to 6% range overall, which, for an organization this size is pretty low, and it's I think a reflection of stability in our organization. This year we increased from 5.64% to 6.83% turnover, which is a slight increase, but not significant. And if you look at break down those numbers further in the details of the report, you'll see retirements stayed essentially the same. However, there were slightly higher number of resignations and a little higher number of disciplinary cases that resulted in people being terminated. We do expect for next year's report the number of retirements to drastically increase. We'll probably see double, perhaps even triple the number this year as the 2011-12 year, merely because of the retirement incentive that I'm sure you've heard about, which essentially took effect in the current fiscal year. Those who took part in the retirement incentive, as well as those who were laid off, all separated August 31st of this year. So that would be reflected in the 2012-2013 report. So we anticipate seeing, again, a much higher number of retirements next year. Another measure we look at fairly closely is labor relations activity. And labor relations, by that, I'm talking about our interactions with our employee bargaining groups, our labor associations, and the various MOU contracts that we have. We have pretty much shied away in the last couple of years from multi-year labor contracts with our various groups, simply because the economic situation has been so uncertain. And so what we've ended up doing is essentially negotiating every year with each group on 1-year memorandum of understanding. It's a lot more work than what we've done in the past, but given the state of the economy and the state of uncertainty, it's been something that we've had to do in the past few years. I mean, a year ago, if we had known that we'd have to deal with the dissolution of redevelopment, that would have completely caught us off guard. So each year we've been dealing with very challenging budgetary situations, and as a result, we've ended up having to deal with our bargaining groups each and every year rather than going with multi-year contracts. So that's taking a significant amount of my time and the staff's time. I know it's not necessarily the purview of the commission, but again, as an interest in what we do in human resources, it bears some discussion. So there's a lot of activity and a lot of information in this report, and if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer any that you have. Again, discussions about our training programs, our evaluation program, which we try and stay on top of. Lots of very good information here. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. And if you want to give a shout out to Debbie Mallon, good job on this report. Feel free to do that. I'm sure she and her mother are watching this meeting. So,
Okay, any questions from commissioners?
Yes.
Mr. Gregorian?
Mr. Doyle, on this page number 3, actually, personal transactions, new hires. You mentioned 53 new salaried and 139 hourly, and total hires 192 in 2011-2012. Due to the fact that we had some laid off and some early retirement personnel over there, are these new people? I mean, promotional or just a new hired personnel, or would you please give me some update or explain the situation?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gregorian, the hiring reflected there, and I'm glad you broke those out into salaried versus hourly. The salaried is our full-time positions, and as I had said earlier, it hasn't increased dramatically, but for the hiring in the police department, which we had done with those 19 new police officer recruits, which more or less makes up the difference between last year, where we had 33 new hires, and this year, where it's 53. So it's about a difference of 20, and that's more or less what explains that increase. The hourly is always going to be at a certain level, because that reflects some part-time positions that we hire, but it also reflects the most of the seasonal employment that we have of the large numbers of people we hire at the beginning of each summer for our day camp programs, our aquatics programs, and the various things that we do in the parks. And essentially, those employees are hired in and around June of each year, and they do that program, and then they're let go at the end of the summer, roughly at the end of August. So you see that pattern from one year to the next, as long as we keep those summer programs robust. So that's more or less what that reflects.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I'm sure the Commission is going to offer a big thank you to Ms. Mallon, wherever she may be, and of course to you, Mr. Doyle, for overseeing the production of this very, very excellent report. With that, and with the permission of my fellow commissioners, I'd like to take two items out of order. I noticed that two people walked into the room who are here to receive a very well-deserved congratulations from this commission, Ms. Van Meiden and Mr. Zern. So if we could take first item 12B, read that into the record.
Item 12B, notification of appointment of Stephen Zern to General Manager of Glendale Water and Power.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is just a notification to the Commission of the appointment of Mr. Zern as the director, the General Manager of our Water and Power Department. Mr. Zern has been with this organization for about 25 years in various capacities, but he's grown up through the ranks within the Public Works Department, and he's been Public Works Director now for 9 years, and that is a major, significant operation. And upon the resignation of Mr. Steiger as the head of Water and Power a few months back, Mr. Zern was appointed in an interim capacity to head up Water and Power, and his qualifications and readiness for this challenge seemed exemplary. So at the City Council meeting last week, the City Manager, with the City Council full concurrence, voted to appoint Mr. Zern as the permanent head of Glendale Water and Power. And so as per the charter and our rules, this appointment was made and requires our notification to the Commission of his appointment. So doing with this action, and a copy of the motion is provided in your staff report. Mr. Zern is here if you'd like to say hello or congratulate him.
We certainly would.
I hope he got a big raise.
Not sure it's worth it, but
You deserve.
I don't know if I'd be here.
You deserve it all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a great honor and privilege to be able to serve the men and women of Glendale Water and Power, and to continue to serve men and women of the Glendale Public Works Department. As I told somebody, I have spent half my life in the Public Works Department. Not half my adult life, not half my career, half my life has been spent there. And to be able to continue that is a good thing for me, and I hope they think it's a good thing as well. And I'm looking forward to all the challenges in water and power. It's a good group of people too, and we will get things straightened up and back on the straight and narrow very soon.
Without raising the water rates.
I can't guarantee that, Mr. Devine.
Oh, there you go.
I'll make those guarantees.
You're either a very courageous man or suicidal. One or the other.
Mr. Mnuchin, that jury's still out on that, that's for sure.
Thank you very much. That's all we can say.
Well, we received our report on the smart meter of when we use our electricity. My wife's been accusing me of using all of the electricity, except the heightened hours is from 5 to 6, and as you might know, I'm not home now between 5 and 6. So my wife wanted me to express her disappointment in that report that obviously has been doctored well, we want to congratulate you, Mr. Zern. I saw you earlier
Yes.
this week and congratulate you. And I noted from the report, you now have under your jurisdiction 599 of the 1,600 employees are under your direction. So clearly they have a lot of faith in you. We have a lot of faith in you. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I'd like to echo that. I met Steve many years ago when I first became involved in City of Glendale things, and I think you were assistant to Kerry Morford
Yes.
in Public Works Department.
Yes.
And at that time, and since then, Steve has always been there to help people and look out for the interests of the city, and I've always been very, very impressed with how he solves problems and gets things done, and is a true excellent manager. So please accept my and the Commission's congratulations, and we look forward to working with you for the next 20 years.
Sure. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Mr. Devine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Zern?
Mr. Chair.
If I may,
However,
while the gentleman to my left congratulate you and talk about events that date themselves going back many years of service here, I want to congratulate you while I have you on the podium, ask you about something that was in the report this month. On the smart meters, it seems that there is an election that some people, if they don't want to, they opt out, and then we have staff allocated for that. Can you educate me about that while you're here?
Mr. Gazarian, there is a...
Let me just jump in here. That is not something that's on this agenda.
It is.
The smart meter item.
I would be happy to talk to you.
Well, it's about a job description, and it's about a utility manager.
It's in a job description.
But we're not discussing that item at this point. I guess we can take it out.
We're not discussing that item, but unless you want to sit and come back up while you're here.
He's here.
Why don't we read it onto the record and then it
He can answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Too many attorneys here.
Yes, I didn't
God.
say.
Ms. Varbetian is asking me to engage her. I'll engage her later if you wouldn't mind answering my question. I'd be grateful.
Not at all.
Thank you.
We have an opt-out clause for our metering system. For those who don't want the advanced meter, they have the opportunity to opt out and continue to have a analog meter. It will cost them to do that. They will pay a premium to be able to have that, and then we still have to have staff that goes out and services those particular meters. It's a very small number right now. I don't expect it's going to grow tremendously, but we are still going to have to, because we offer that. We're going to have to be able to read that meter as well, because going back to a traditional meter means we don't have the technology to read it from a central point, to read it through a transmitter.
Is that something that is being tried in other municipalities, the opt-out option? Or
Yes. Some, even the privately owned utilities as well, the investor-owned utilities. I think PG&E has an opt-out clause. I believe Edison has one. And I know Burbank and Pasadena, I'm not sure if they have them, but I know that they're contemplating those because they've got some of the same concerned citizens. Again, a very small group, but it's something that we brought back to council and council approved.
is it a phase-out process, do you think, in your opinion? I mean, or is this going to be an opt-out option for those who want to opt out and stay opted out? Because though we increase, do we pass on the cost to the consumer? Because we're maintaining staff for that, obviously.
Correct. They pay a premium to opt out, essentially.
And is that covered?
Yes.
Additional
That's the way
staff?
that it had been set up. That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Okay, we'll go to item 15C.
Notification of appointment of Jillian Van Meiden to Chief Assistant City Attorney.
Mr. Doyle.
Chair Devine, this, again, is a notification of the Commission of the appointment of Ms. Van Meiden to the Chief Assistant City Attorney position. The charter and the rules enable the City Attorney to appoint his or her assistants and deputies directly without the civil service or without the examination process. I will say Mr. Garcia did, in fact, want to fill this position internally, and he opened the process up to his staff, and there was actually a process where interviews were conducted, and from what I recall, it was quite the grilling by some executives and key members of staff. The outcome of that was the appointment of Ms. Jillian Van Meiden as the Chief Assistant City Attorney. Ms. Van Meiden has not had a lot of interaction with this particular commission. However, her background is more in the land use and development area. She's worked exclusively with the redevelopment agency as it existed in the community development department. Through the course of this past year, she's been very busy with regard to the transition of the redevelopment agency to the successor agency, and in fact, I don't know how we would have gotten through that whole transition without her. She's been an exemplary employee, and again, she is here for introduction and acknowledgement by the Commission. So,
Ms. Van Meiden, you want to step up? And again, on behalf of the Commission, we certainly congratulate you and admire you in your rise through the ranks to the top position there. Any of the Commissioners wish to make some comments?
Actually, I do.
Mr. Gaddis.
I heard that on the TV when she was appointed, and I sent her a personal email to congratulate her. I've worked with Ms. Van Meiden for a fair number of years over the last time, and I've found her to be beyond competent. She is a very intelligent, very smart, very shrewd lawyer. We are very fortunate to have her in the city, and she does her job and does it well and protects the city. And I've been on the opposite end of her, and I've not necessarily agreed with her, but I know one thing: she's always had the good of the city at heart. And I've congratulated her. I'll congratulate you again. It is indeed well deserved, Jillian. Good luck.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely. Feelings mutual from everyone here.
From a shrewd lawyer, compliments such as the one that Commissioner Ganthus gave, I can only say I hope to be as shrewd as you. If he describes you as shrewd, you must be shrewd, and I welcome a shrewd attorney in the city attorney's office.
We go way back.
Way back.
Back to my old prosecution days. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thanks to the Commission. I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Thank
I look
you.
forward to serving the city for
Congratulations.
a lot more years.
20
Thank
more
you.
years.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll even see you in front of our commission now that you've got this exalted position.
Actually, I will add that I did appear before the Commission early in my career while I was a prosecutor. I did come in, so I do have some experience, and that's nearly 15 years ago. So,
That was before my time, believe it or not. I've been on here a long time, but not that long.
and of course, I would look forward to serving the Commission or advising the Commission as necessary if that were required. So I thank you very much again for your vote
Thank you
of
for coming
confidence.
in, and you can go home now. You don't have to sit through a long agenda.
Exactly. Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could recommend we finish item 12. We have the past due employee performance evaluation. One of our department's executives is here.
Okay. That's fine. Candace, do you want to take
Yes, I
the...
will. Thank you very much. And as usual, I do this in memory of our esteemed colleague who is no longer with us, Roy Coleman. No past dues are the city attorney's office, city clerk's office, the city manager's office, the fire department, the library, police, and public works are all no past dues. We have one, I take it we have third notices in the information services. Is that correct, Mr. Doyle?
Yes, sir.
So I take it that's the executive here to address that. I
Yeah,
would assume.
Mr. Frege is here if you have questions.
Let's have Mr. Frege come forward. May I continue? You want to come forward? State your name for the record, please.
Ed Frege, Director of Information Services. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission.
Mr. Fraga, and we don't like to do this to embarrass anybody, but as you, and I know you're relatively new, these performance evaluations are critically important, not only for the employee, but for us when, in fact, if there are disciplinary hearings that come before us, the first exhibit in every book is the performance evaluations. If they're good, then the employee puts it forward. If they're bad, then the appointing authority puts it forward. And if they're delayed, everybody makes comments on them. So I understand there are special circumstances. I assume you have a reason for the 3 that you want to put forward to the Commission?
Yes. Actually, I've been here 3.5 years, and this is my first time before the Commission. This came about largely because we have had some changes with all of the layoffs and terminations and retirements. We've had administrator leave our group. We've had changes in our administration folks, and frankly, dealing with all of that, plus dealing with the blowback of that from all the other departments, we dropped the ball on this, and we were a day late for our 3rd notice reviews, but we did turn them in at that as soon as we were notified.
Mr. Chair, I can concur. Those were turned in.
So you really did comply with the 2nd notice, but a day late, which turned it into a 3rd notice?
It turned in a day late,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
I want to ask Mr. Doyle, where it shows on first notice 2, second notice 1, and third notice 3, does that mean there were 6 total that were late, or do the first notices carry over to the second notice? Well, I guess the question is, how many employees does this represent?
Well, each of those represent different individuals. So for this department, as an example, there were 2 first notices, 3 second notices, and 3 third notices. The same with each of the departments. Those aren't cumulative. Those are
different folks. And
So there's a total of 8 people then that were late. And I think from your statement, you're saying that all 8 of those have now been caught up?
No, the 3rd notice ones were done.
Okay.
So you still have 3 second notices?
Yes, sir.
I have a question to you, Mr. Doyle, with respect to this. While we have the good public servant in front of us, why wouldn't the information services have something akin to the police department column where there are 10 special circumstances? Because what the gentleman identified to me, it seems like a special circumstance. Is this something different when we're dealing with information services versus the police department?
Chair Devine, Commissioner Kazarian, special circumstances are generally reserved for situations where an individual physically cannot be given a performance evaluation. And it's generally 2 reasons. One, they're either out on some sort of an illness or a workers' comp injury or something like that, or if the individual is involved in some sort of a disciplinary action or an investigation relating to a disciplinary action. This commission has been very, very strict on this whole subject matter for many years, and over the years I've been given pretty explicit direction on how this is to be managed relative to granting any exceptions or special circumstances. So I imagine that definition of special circumstances could be broadened a bit, but for the most part, we've only reserved that for those situations where, again, it's either illness or medical related or disciplinary related.
It seems as though it's a circumstance that has to do with the civil servant's inability to take part in the evaluation process versus here where it's a shortage of staff and a blowback resulting from it and layoffs and whatnot.
Exactly. And
I understand. I understand.
I can say, to concur with Mr. Fraga, his department did get affected very heavily by not only the retirement situation, the layoffs, but additionally, something we didn't talk about with these layoffs is the bumping process where individuals will lose their position and end up in another department. And Mr. Fraga ended up with new employees, and he lost some very trusted employees of his own and ended up with new people, and all of this has occurred in the last month and a half, and it's been quite difficult for him and for other departments.
I was uncomfortable, Mr. Craig, with your characterization of the circumstance as you dropping the ball, because certainly if I tie your hands behind your back, you're not going to be able to hold on or certainly not drop a ball, and it looks like extenuating circumstances have caused that, and I wish you well in getting back on track. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I feel that I have the responsibility no matter what, so.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you have
Thank
more?
you. No, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item.
Class specification for approval, utility locator.
Mr. Doyle.
Chair Devine, members of the Commission, this item is a class specification for a new classification. It's a utility locator. This is within our Water and Power Department. This is a position that marks, locates, and identifies underground utilities throughout the city. This position has been called a number of things over the years. Service spotter. It's been handled by our inspection crews. It's been handled by our service planning crews, our engineering technicians, and it's one of those situations that it's probably needed its own job classification for quite some time. We're taking the opportunity now to essentially transition some of our meter readers whose positions are largely going to be obsolete with the advent of the smart grid and the smart meter installation, to take two of these individuals and transition them to the utility locator classification. And that's more or less what we have. The other meter readers have been, I'd say, successfully transitioned to other roles, either in customer service or other areas within the utility. So with that, if you have questions about this specification, be happy to try and answer them. Ms. Akopian from my staff worked on this specification in the report. We have Mr. Abweg from Water and Power and Mr. Zern from Water and Power as well, if you have questions.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Hampus?
So these people that are going to be utility locators are going to continue doing meter reading and other duties?
Mr. Gantis, they are being transitioned away from meter reading. As the report says, there's a few people who opted out of the whole smart meter situation. So I think we're going to need to keep one or two meter readers, but the rest are being transitioned or moved to other positions. Two of them are going to be going to this job title.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question under recommendations. It says staff recommends the approval of the changes to the class, and I thought it was a new class. So there are no changes. Is that?
That is correct. That's a typographical error, Mr. Chair. That should say staff recommends approval of the new class specification.
Any other comments or questions? Is there a motion?
Chair, I'm sorry. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Doyle. So we do have just 2% that for this classification. Is that correct?
That is the intent, Commissioner Gregorian, to have two incumbents in this position.
Make a motion to move.
Second?
Second.
Unanimous consent with no objection. Next item, please.
Class specification for approval, utility safety officer.
Mr. Doyle.
Chair Devine, members of the Commission, this item is again a new classification within our Water and Power Department. This position is a mid-management position of utility safety officer. You may or may not know the city has an occupational safety program which is staffed by a safety administrator. He has one safety specialist working for him. Their responsibilities for the oversight of the occupational safety program throughout the whole city. The Water and Power Department has, I would say, special needs given the very hazardous nature of the work, the technical nature of the work, and some of the environmentally sensitive work that is done within Water and Power. Safety has been a tremendously big priority for the utility, and in years past we have extended the responsibility for the safety program within the utility department by having safety coordinators within each major section of the water and power operation. So we would essentially take one of the electrical line supervisors and pull him aside and put them in charge of safety for the electrical section. We'd take one of the water supervisors, put them in charge of safety operations for water. We'd generally take somebody from the power plant and pull them aside to be the safety specialist for the power plant. And what we're seeing is that this is not the most effective means of full oversight of the safety function. We want to try to establish more consistency with how the safety program is run, and for the most part, a greater level of expertise in the occupational safety field. What we have currently are people who know their jobs very well. Electrical line people know the electrical work, water people know the water work very well, but their expertise in safety might require some additional needs or additional training. So what we're planning to do is eliminate those individual safety coordinators and have one person in charge of the safety program for the entire utility and work with all the sections and hire somebody with a safety background as opposed to necessarily a utility background. Finding somebody with a safety background and the utility background would be a great boon if we were able to do that. But again, we're looking for somebody who's going to be able to wear both hats and work closely in alignment with the Water and Power Director as well as the safety administrator for the city. So that's more or less the intent here for this position. So. It's quite an extensive specification, and it's one that you will find typically in other utilities. So if you have questions for this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Again, Mr. Zern is here, Mr. Boeg, and Mr. Kopian as well.
Okay, I would start off with the same comment under recommendations. It needs to be changed the way we changed the other one from changing the spec to a new spec.
That's correct.
And any questions from commissioners? Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have unanimous consent with no objections. And next item, please.
Job bulletin for approval, fire engineer.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a job bulletin for approval for the position of fire engineer. This is a promotional position within the fire department. Because this is a sworn safety promotional recruitment, as per our rules, this has to come before the Commission, just as we would do for a fire captain or a police lieutenant, police captain, police sergeant. These are very sensitive, very technical type examinations and very competitive as well. And again, for that reason, our rules require their review by the Commission. This position we hope to open upon approval of the Commission on October 12th, 2012, and run the filing period through October 12th. I'm sorry, from October 1st, 2012 to October 12th, 2012. We do have a slight amended version of this recruitment bulletin, and I'll explain very briefly. It was handed out to you. There's one slight change in the portion of the exam where it says the selection process, and it's really the page 4 of 5. This is a very complicated exam. There are 5 sections to it. There's a driving section, and it's a performance-related exam. There's an operation of aerial ladder truck. There's an operation of fire hydrant. There's a drafting exercise, and then there's a more or less an acting captain engineer skills exercise. And what we've done, the difference between what was in your packet is that the portion dealing with the pre-check of the apparatus, it was going to be made part of the drafting exercise. Instead, we're going to have that as part of the driving exercise. So that's just one minor change. And other than that, this bulletin is fully consistent with the approved class specification. We recommend your approval.
Mr. Gannon.
Well, another change, unless I'm missing something here, is this addition of the promotional eligibility of part-time employees. Could you explain that to me, please?
Which page?
On page 3 of 5, above where it says selection process. That was not in the original bulletin that was presented to us.
Okay. Okay.
Have it there?
Have Mr. Kwan. This is boilerplate language for all of our.
I don't recall seeing this in a public safety bulletin, so maybe I'm.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Russ Kwan, Human Resources Analyst. Like Mr. Doyle stated, the promotional language is boilerplate language that we use for all promotional recruitments. So in this case, we are using that language again because this is going to be limited to the City of Glendale or current City of Glendale employees.
So we use part-time. May I continue? We use part-time, but they have to meet. It says meet the minimum qualifications. Does that include experience as well?
That's correct. So the applicants filing for this position would need to meet the minimum requirements for the position as well as the promotional eligibility.
I think the word requirements would be more consistent with the bulletin than qualifications, because we talk about minimum requirements on here, and you just said that, and I actually think it's much more consistent. Right. If that's our boilerplate language, I don't know if that's in other ones. But if we're going to be consistent, we don't say they have minimum qualifications. We say they have minimum requirements, and I think that would clarify that, because experience. So let me understand this. They have to have 3 years of experience if they're part-time, and I don't know if we have any, in municipal firefighting work, of which 1 year has been with Glendale. And then in addition, they would have had to have shown that they worked at a minimum, as a part-time, a minimum of 6 months full-time service in the period preceding the filing date. Is that correct?
They must have completed probation or 6 months of city employment.
Yes.
So,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gant, we're not going to have any part-time employees.
I didn't think so. That's why I wondered why it was put in there.
This is, again, boilerplate language for our promotional positions. Typically, if we have a clerical position or something of a lower level, and we have a long-time part-time hourly employee might meet the minimum qualifications, and under this circumstance, they would be eligible to apply as a promotional candidate. But in this one in particular, we're not going to see any part-timers. The candidate pool for a fire engineer is firefighter. They're all salaried to full-time.
That's what I thought. I'm done.
Okay, any other questions? I do have 2 quick comments. One on the introductory report where you say the Glendale Firefighter Association has been given the opportunity to review the job bulletin. I'm assuming that they submitted no comments. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, they actually did submit comments, and the issue that caused us to amend this bulletin actually, I think, derived from comments by the Glendale Firefighters Association.
It would be helpful to me, and I don't know about the other commissioners, if in the future we put on there that they've been contacted and had no comment or suggested a change, just so we know that they came back with some recommendation or they're happy with it.
Mr. Chair, that's a great suggestion. The only problem with that is that sometimes they don't get, by the time this is prepared, this report, and the agenda is put together, sometimes we will not have heard back from the association by that time. So it's hard to say, that there were no comments or not. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand. What you're saying timing-wise.
Yes.
It's hard for at least me to say that they're in agreement or not, or they have a problem with it and approve it without knowing they're okay with it. So.
But if they have a problem, they'd be here. That's one of the reasons why that commenced during my past 13, well, I've been on this commission, because there were questions saying, well, have the representative groups been notified so that they would have an opportunity to comment on it? That's why we put it in this way. If they had a comment, if they disagreed with something, they would have come in and said so. That's why it was put on, to give them the opportunity to come in and say so. We assumed and have assumed that their lack of appearance means their consent. Before, there had not been, this had not been put in there up until maybe 5-6 years ago, Matt, 7 years ago maybe.
Correct.
That we wouldn't be saying that.
Okay, I think the bottom line for me is that they've looked at it, and if they're not here, we know they have seen it.
Correct.
And based on the timing schedule you just gave, even though they may not comment back by the time this gets printed, just to know that they have seen it and acknowledged it, and they're not here.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll remind you that this packet is prepared. We try to get everything completed by the preceding week, Tuesday or Wednesday of the preceding week. So we always run these things by both the specifications and bulletins. We always run them by the appropriate employee association. But honestly, by the time we have this printed and prepared and distributed, we don't often hear back from them until maybe Monday of the week of the meeting or Tuesday. In fact, today we actually heard back this afternoon. So.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can we report back orally if not in writing? Maybe we can do that.
That would be fine. When you make your presentation, if you could say that you were contacted at 3 o'clock today, that they had no objection, then we could put this thing to bed.
Very good.
Okay. Well, last item on this, on the election process, where it talks about a 3-day written examination appeal period will be held beginning on Wednesday, October 24th. Is that appeal to this commission, or is there a interim appeal procedure?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, there's an interim appeal procedure. As per the rules, an individual may have, it's up to 3 days to raise any concerns relating to the job relatedness of the exam or any of its components, the fairness of any element of this examination process. And that appeal is made internally to my office, and I would then collaborate with the appropriate management in that particular department to determine whether or not the appeal is valid or if it's invalid. And an answer is given back to those who appeal, and if they're not satisfied with that answer, they then have the right to request that it be brought to the Civil Service Commission's attention.
Okay. And the last item, where you say no more than top 10 scoring candidates with a minimum of 70 points will be scheduled for the next phase. Does that mean if there's 30 candidates who score above 70, only 10 of those will be eligible to continue with the
In theory, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. We'll take the top 10 candidates. In reality, I don't think we'll have 30 candidates. What are we anticipating, Russ?
At this point, we're uncertain to the number of applicants at this point. However, we do anticipate 30 applicants. The reason why we do have to set a limit on the number of applicants that we can take to the next stage is because the performance examination is an extremely long event. There are 5 events, and it does take, to get through 10 applicants, it will take us approximately 2 days to get those 10 through the entire process.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Just a
motion.
Second.
We have unanimous consent with no objection. Next item, please.
Report on administrative leave.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, per the Commission's request, I believe it was back in February, you had asked that we provide a quarterly report on the numbers of employees on administrative leave throughout the organization, and we've done so here. We have a total of 4 currently, and we have 2 from police and 1 from water and power, 1 from finance department. As you can see, the varying dates when these took effect. Some of these are far more complex than others, but I will say all of these involve rather extensive investigations, and we're attempting to conclude those investigations and come to some resolution on these cases as quickly as possible. We do hope to keep this number low, but I will say again, the situations involving these employees are such that we truly believe that it is appropriate to have these individuals on administrative leave, and like I said, we hope to wrap these investigations up very, very soon. So, if you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions, Mr. Gregorian?
Yes, last time on these subjects, I remember Commissioner Gazarian mentioned, if it's possible, correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, that we could somehow use them while they're in administrative leave and we are paying them to do something for the city. Would like to please educate me if it's something is happening, or this is that a correct statement, Commissioner Gazarian?
No, I was concerned about the number of months people would be on administrative leave and they would be on our payroll or the city's payroll. And was there any supplemental way of utilizing the resource as opposed to just paying for it? But I believe my concerns were answered in detail as to the reasons why some of these administrative leaves were taking longer, and the blame, not to really use that's not perhaps the right word, but the cause of it did not lie within the various departments who were engaging in the administrative investigation. It was a matter of a series of circumstances, a confluence of, if you will, that was causing the delays.
Thank you. Yes.
Further questions?
No, just a quick comment. I think one of the points that, as this commission, what we wanted to make sure, at least you as the director of HR, is intimately involved in these, and at least speaking for myself, I'm confident that you have it under control.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Manukian, I do want to say we do not want to see many of these occur, because it is paid leave. The individual is generally at home. However, I will assure you that these cases are appropriate. None of these occur without my approval, without my knowledge. And for the whole myriad of reasons that I think when I gave my initial report on this, it's just a process that takes time in order to ensure that due process is addressed with the employees in these circumstances. And again, we hope to keep these minimal as possible and get to the conclusion as quickly as possible. And I think I said when I was giving the initial report, I will get requests on occasion from some departments where they will say, I'm having difficulty with this employee, they're a problem, can't we just put them on administrative leave and get them out of here for one reason or another? And if it doesn't meet a certain threshold of either safety, security, or disciplinary circumstance, I won't approve those, because I don't want to see this process abused in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, we will keep our eye on this, and I do again appreciate the Commission's interest in this, because this is actually a process that falls within the civil service rules and is appropriate for you to inquire. So,
Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the next item.
Annual status report on hourly employment.
Mr. Chair, I'll be brief on this one. This is an annual report that we've been doing since the year 2005. At that time, the Commission directed staff to report and to take some measures to try and reduce what seemed to be efforts by various departments throughout the city to employ individuals on an hourly basis in a full-time or a near full-time capacity, which it could be perceived as a way of circumventing the normal hiring process or circumventing the process of hiring salaried employees. At that time, we went through a various number of measures to make sure that we weren't again abusing the process of hiring hourly employees, and we set forth a threshold of hours within a fiscal year to try and keep our part-time hourly employees under that threshold. And that threshold ended up being 1,250 hours. Again, at that time, the Commission had requested that we report each year about the numbers and departments of all employees who would fall under, or those numbers of employees that worked in excess of 1,250 hours, and particularly those that went over the threshold that weren't granted a special exemption from the city manager's office. The numbers that we have this year are somewhat consistent with the last few years, and I do apologize because we had to amend this report as well, but it's an amendment in a good way, where the original report noted that there were 105 hourly part-time employees who exceeded the 1,250-hour threshold, and it said that 97 of those were granted exemptions by the city manager's office, and that we had 8 instances of noncompliance. Further information came forth to determine that we've actually only had 5 instances of noncompliance, and a few of these were just simple oversights by the department who had exceeded the 1,250 hours by small amounts, and a few others had various reasons for exceeding it. But nevertheless, I think we're doing a fairly decent job of policing this situation. And again, with only 5 instances of noncompliance, I think it's relatively consistent with our past few years of since we've been keeping track of this. So if you have questions on this, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Alex Soto from my staff prepared this report, and he is here if you have any specifics.
Questions? Being none, I have 2 quick ones. I noticed many of these have, after the job title, 1 through 5 asterisks after the last wording, and there's no key to explain what that means. Question 1. Question 2, on one of the noncompliance, you indicate that it's administrative oversight, but on the other ones, there's no reason for the noncompliance. Quick explanation on those.
Absolutely. Chair Devine, members of the Commission, Alex Soto, Human Resources Associate. With regards to the asterisks, this is in response to Commissioner Gantis's request last year. We used to show how many previous years the employee had exceeded 1,900 hours. What we're doing now is showing each asterisk represents how many years in the past 5 fiscal years, excluding the most recent fiscal year, the employee has exceeded 1,250 hours.
The number of years. Yes.
Correct, excluding the fiscal year that just ended.
I would say all of those were granted exemptions by the city manager.
That is correct. So this report actually goes back to, I believe it's the 2006-2007 fiscal year in terms of...
That was a suggestion, Commissioner Gantis.
That is correct.
What a good job, Mr.
Good idea, John. And
What
the
we are going to
reasons
do
are,
without
can we
you.
assume that...
Even a blind squirrel can get nuts.
I forgot, how many years were you on the commission, sir?
Commissioner Manukian, what are we going to do without Mr. Gantis?
The last question was the reasons for the noncompliance. Are they all basically the same, administrative oversights, or?
They're all essentially administrative oversights. There was one of them where the employee worked about 800 hours in one department and then transferred to another department and worked another 700 or 800 hours. So didn't exceed the 1,250 in either department, but cumulatively went over. Because of that, neither department was kind of aware that they needed to submit the request for the exemption because they had never exceeded the hours under their supervision.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Very much.
And members of the Commission, this was a report that was we were tasked with many years ago, and if the Commission does continue to see a need for this report, we will certainly continue to do it. If there's a lack of interest, please let me know.
I'll ask the commissioners right now. Gregorian?
I'm sorry,
Okay. Mr. Doyle is asking whether or not the commission felt a need to continue the production of this report. This was done a number of years ago, I think at the request of Mr. Gantis or
Coleman.
Mr. Coleman. So the question is, and I'll ask each of the commissioners, do you want to have staff continue to prepare this report, or is it something you do on an as-needed basis?
My comment would be, are you doing this monitoring just for this commission? Or if this report wasn't needed, you would not be monitoring these hourlies?
Commissioner Manukian, we are monitoring these, and we would still do it. The biggest reason is to keep track of when a salaried employee retires and is hired in an hourly capacity, we absolutely have to keep track of their hours, because under state law and PERS, they're only allowed to work under 960 hours. So we have a need to run this report and see where we're at as it pertains to reemployed retirees. As far as the others, probably not, but it's an easy enough report to produce. I mean,
Yeah, well, I would suggest maybe a compromise. I really see no need to have a full report, is to, since you do it anyway on a yearly basis, just present the ones that are in excess of the 1,250 hours so we can get an idea of the non-compliant ones.
That's what you have here.
Well, no, we have all the others listed, the entire...
No, these are all over 1,250.
Right, but most of them are granted by administration. There were 8, or in this case 5, that were non-compliant. So I would personally only be interested in seeing a report yearly that shows any that are
non-compliant. Okay.
I don't know.
I concur.
Well, I mean, I agree that it's the reasoning that was done 7 years ago had more to do with, if you'll note, that we had 194 in 2004, which was before we employed. We actually looked at all of our hourly employees. That hadn't been looked at in 40 years, 50 years, and there were many hourly employees that were working full-time, stayed on, and were hourly, still protected by civil service, but were there in a full-time capacity but not getting full-time. So the idea was that we wanted to be sure that that wasn't a practice that continued. That was also done in 2005 at a time when the economy was in a far different position. To me now, then I understood it and agreed with it. To me now, if in fact we are employing hourlies, the savings to the city, we're employing people, but the idea of benefits that go with it, that would go on on a part-time hourly basis, which a lot of these people are, is the savings is tremendous. So I'm not sure that we really need it. If we're going to have just the non-compliant, I think that's fine. I think we need to have still the stars to know that, and some controls, and know how many are, because I've noticed we creeped up now. We were down to 60, and then we went up to, we were down to 47, then we creeped up to 60, and now we're creeping up to 89. We don't want to get back to where we have people that are working essentially full-time that are not at least being treated as full-time employees. So I think the number is fine. We don't need the exact position.
If I heard you correctly, Mr. Doyle, you said you would continue to monitor it. It's not a big deal to prepare these reports, so I, for one, I will step into the other direction, and if I had my wish granted, I would ask that these reports continue to be made on an annual basis. I think it provides us insight into what's going on and keeps us in the loop, so that we don't have to have a 2005 issue come up, if it ever does. Especially in light of the fact that it apparently is not such a difficult
I think,
report.
Based on the nods I'm getting from Mr. Gregorian and Mr. Ganis, we'll go ahead and follow Mr. Varian's suggestion and continue the report.
Okay.
So, next item.
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Chair, the agenda forecast speaks for itself. We, as you know, we have 3 hearings currently being undertaken. Those aren't reflected on the report, but they certainly are reflective of your current workload. We have nothing pressing for our upcoming meeting, but we do believe we will have some items for that October 10th meeting. 24th, we have the advertising budget expenditures report, which is quarterly, and then we go into November and holiday season. So nothing more really to report on this.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a comment. I had heard, or we talked, or it was mentioned that the idea of the rules regarding the layoffs and the bumping and all of that was going to be something that was going to be examined, re-examined, which it hasn't been for a while. Is that going to be, is that something that we need to request to have on, or is that something that's going to be coming to us?
Well, maybe I'll have Ms. Varpetian address that, because we are looking at issues relating to the charter. And one issue that always comes up when we look at any type of possible modification of the charter are civil service related issues. And we do have a bit of a concern with the layoff process and how the bumping works. And it's something that I think we'll be bringing before the council in a few weeks to see if we want to go there. But maybe Ms. Varpetian can elaborate more.
On the bumping issue specifically?
Well, yeah, that became an issue this year. I mean, there were many, I think you even mentioned it, that the information services had key employees that basically, as the bumping went down, I understand in finance this happened, or with the treasurer's office. That
everywhere.
I mean, these are people that were ingrained in working there, and because of the bumping rights, they had to move on, and we're basically starting, not only losing our brains of all the years there, but we also have lost a lot of people that had experience, and that, I think that's a concern, because in a lot of instances we have just new people doing new things that creates, I think, a service problem. So I thought, I don't know if that, I guess if it's a council thing, that's fine. I thought it was something that we looked at as part of our rules.
No, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, and Commissioner Gantis, the issue of bumping is specifically outlined in the charter, and any amendment to it would require a vote. But it is a matter that we are going to take to the council, and we can certainly inform you of the date when we're going to do that. And if you'd like to appear and make comments to the council at that time, you can certainly do that. But it is something that would require that the council take action, that it be placed on the ballot in April, and then have a vote.
Okay.
That's something the council would want a recommendation from or concurrence with from the commission before they decide on it, or the commission normally bypassed on something?
I think in the past, when the amendment occurred, the commission has certainly participated, and I think they even wrote the argument. The chair of the commission wrote the argument in favor of the amendment. So I don't think we'll have enough time to bring back a report to this commission and then take it to council, because I think we're slated to go to council on October 9th. And unless that date changes, we won't have a meeting before that to bring to the commission. But we can certainly share the report with you and encourage you to attend. We will be available to answer questions for you, not in this context, but individually. And so if you have any concerns, the council meeting would probably be the best place to voice them.
Mr. Chairman, and that would be fine. Could we ask that when the report obviously goes to the council first, that we be included, at least with just that report, possibly it can be emailed or something. Certainly I would like it. I don't know about the rest of the commissioners. And I assume that report is going to have in it things that I've heard, that there were 3 people in the treasurer's office that got bumped to the public works, and then people from where public works went into the finance. And is that going to be, is there going to be some, not obviously names, but specific instances where that's occurred?
Initially, no, but the idea is to get further direction from council, and so what we were looking to do is introduce a number of ideas, not limited to the civil service provisions of the charter, but other provisions as well, and get direction from council. So the specifics of that will not be included as to what occurred this last go-around, and certainly council is aware of it. But we are looking for direction from council, so
I would like to have a copy of that report if it's possible.
Certainly, we'll do that. Again, that report to council is going to be fairly broad, addressing a number of areas that may be looked at in the charter, including finance limits, purchasing procedures, of course, some of our stuff, the whole treasurer position and all that. So it's just a matter of determining where the council wants to go with that.
You can send my copy to John, too.
Okay, with that, next item.
Civil Service Commission, staff comments.
Do you have any comments?
Thank you. Chair Devine, members of the Commission, Mr. Doyle, staff. 11 years ago, in September of 2001 rather, we had the horrible day of September 11th. I don't recall us meeting as a body here in this month, and now 11 years and 15 days have elapsed from that tragic day. I, for one, would like to commemorate the memory of all those lives lost and honor the civil servants of the New York City Fire Department, the Police Department, the Port Authority, and all those civil servants from all 50 states, including California, and from the city of Glendale, who went and volunteered their rescue efforts and the efforts to clean the ground zero, if you will. I'm a proud American and a proud naturalized American. I visited the site over this past summer, and I think I would be remiss in my duties now as a Civil Service Commissioner to not ask your permission, Chair Devine, to take a moment of silence in memory of that.
Well said.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Is there any other commissioner comments? Any staff comments?
Mr. Chair, I just want to announce there's a very nice event this weekend on Saturday, Unity Fest, which is a really nice program sponsored by the city, where we have entertainment, food, games, and try to have as many of our diverse cultures throughout the city of Glendale participate. It's going to be from this Saturday from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. downtown Glendale. And it's just a great event. I think we'll have a booth there, our department, and many other city departments will be represented there. So I encourage you all to stop on by and enjoy a really fun event. So,
Thank you. Anything else? Next item?
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Sorry.